Rain hit my face like cold coins as I jogged down Atlantic Avenue. One hand clamped over my hood, the other gripping the envelope with my paycheck. Neon from a seafood bar smeared pink and blue across puddles, turning the sidewalk into a shaken mirror. Boston's waterfront smelled like salt, diesel, and wet wool. I kept thinking of Noah asleep with his inhaler on the nightstand, and rent due Friday and the pharmacy text that his refill was waiting unpaid. Harbor Federal Bank sat on the corner like a glass box dropped into the financial district, its doors glowing warm against the storm. I had 15 minutes before the night drop cut off, and my account balance was hanging by a thread. Daycare, groceries, bus pass, the late fee on my electric bill. I told myself that once this deposit cleared, Noah's medicine and a small bag of oranges would not feel impossible. I needed one ordinary errand to stay ordinary. Inside, the lobby smelled of carpet cleaner and damp umbrellas. A security guard glanced up, bored, then back to his phone. I slid my envelope into the deposit slot, watched it vanish, and felt a tiny exhale in my chest. When I turned toward the doors, movement outside snagged my eyes. A woman in a cream coat stumbled backward, and a black SUV rolled up to the curb without headlights. The street kept flowing, and my brain took a second. Two men got out fast, faces half hidden by baseball caps pulled low. One hand clamped the woman's elbow, not rough enough to draw screams, just certain enough to steer her. She tried to twist, heels slipping on the wet curb, and for a heartbeat her eyes met mine through the glass. Then the door opened. She was folded inside, and the SUV swallowed her like a closing mouth. Nobody paused. A couple laughed under an awning as if nothing. When the taillights disappeared into rain, my body finally moved. I pushed outside and the wind slapped me hard, colder than the bank's air. On the sidewalk lay a designer purse on its side, spilling its life across the concrete. Lip gloss rolled toward a drain. Keys glittered under a street lamp. I crouched without thinking, gathering pieces as if order could undo what I had just seen. My hands shook so badly I dropped a credit card twice before breathing. The wallet was heavier than mine, smooth leather that smelled faintly of perfume and money. I opened it like I was trespassing. A driver's license stared back with a careful photo and a name that did not match the panic I'd witnessed. Sophie Emerson. Behind it sat a thick black card, no logo, no address, only a phone number pressed in silver. On the back, someone had written 2 words in neat ink. Emergency only. My spine went rigid instantly. I looked up, expecting someone to ask what happened, to share my shock, to be human with me. People slid past, heads down, collars up, as if the rain gave them permission to ignore everything. My first instinct was police, the safe number, the one you're taught as a kid. But I pictured Noah's photo on my fridge, and how trouble clings to families who can't afford lawyers. That black card felt like a shortcut to danger, and maybe help. I tucked Sophie's wallet and the card into my palm like they could burn through skin. The purse strap was looped around my wrist when I realized I was standing in the open, a witness wearing a target. A horn blared, someone cursed, life went on. My cracked phone flashed low battery, and I considered running back inside, telling the guard, letting the system handle it. Then I remembered her eyes, that silent plea, and my feet refused to move. The card's weight felt wrong, like it belonged in a safe instead of my soaked pocket. Emergency only, it said, and the words sounded less like advice and more like a rule. Who carries a number like that? Not a commuter. Not someone who expects help from strangers. I pictured Sophie Emerson's face on the license, then the SUV door swallowing her. If I called the police, would anyone move? If I called this number, what would it unleash tonight? Behind me, the bank doors hissed as someone exited, and I flinched like I'd been caught. I stepped under a brick overhang beside the ATM, half hiding the purse in my shaking hands. My mind ran 2 tracks: get home to Noah, and do not let a woman vanish without a fight. I could almost hear my mother Evelyn warning me that trouble never pays bills. But conscience is a bill too, and it always comes due no matter what. I wiped rain off my screen with my thumb. The number sat there, plain and unbranded, yet heavier than any warning label. My pulse thudded in my ears. Around me, the district kept moving, taxis gliding, lights blinking, strangers passing. Still, the air around that card felt thicker, like a door cracked open. Who leaves a single number and calls it emergency only? Who answers it? And why would they feel closer than the police? I swallowed, stared at it. The purse strap dug into my wrist, reminding me this was evidence and a life. I pictured Noah waking, padding into the living room, and my stomach twisted. Then I pictured Sophie Emerson vanishing again, This time forever. Because everyone chose comfort. The rain hammered the awning like a timer. One choice, one tap, and my life would split into before and after. I held the phone close, stared at the green icon, and let my fingers sink toward call. My thumb hovered over the green icon while rain hammered the awning above me. I could still see the bank's glass doors behind the curtain of water, and I could still feel Noah's small hand in mine from that morning, sticky with cereal and trust. Calling the police would be clean, official, safe on paper. Calling this number felt like stepping into a hallway with no lights. I told myself I was only asking for help, only reporting what I saw, only being a decent human. Then my thumb pressed down. The phone vibrated once, and the line began to ring, steady and fast, like it already knew me. In the space between rings, I tasted regret and salt only. On the third ring, the call clicked into place, and a voice filled my ear that made the rain feel quieter. It wasn't loud, but it carried the kind of certainty that turns a crowded street into a room. I had the strange sense of being weighed, as if my name and my mistakes were being measured on a scale I couldn't see. My throat tightened. I glanced left and right, scanning the sidewalk for anyone watching, for a camera lens, for the black SUV returning. The voice asked who I was in a way that didn't invite small talk. I gave my first name, and I felt how tiny it sounded. Even breathing seemed like evidence in that moment. I told him where I stood, outside Harbor Federal near the waterfront, under the ATM overhang that smelled like wet concrete. I explained the timing in my head, how it happened in one clean sweep, like the men had rehearsed it. A black SUV eased to the curb without plates I could see, door opening before I processed what I was seeing. Sophie, the name on the license, wore a cream coat and expensive boots that slipped on the curb. She fought in small jerks, not screaming, like she knew screaming wouldn't help. People walked past with their collars up. A couple stepped around the spilled purse like it was trash. I heard myself saying it and hated us all. I forced my memory to slow down and replay the edges, because edges are where truth hides. One of the men kept his right hand on Sophie's elbow, fingers bare despite the cold. When he shifted, I saw the ink on his wrist. A red snake, or maybe a rattler, coiled tight like it was ready to strike. The color was too vivid to be old. It flashed under the street lamp and then vanished under his sleeve as he shoved her into the back seat. The driver had a scar slicing through one eyebrow, pale against his skin, and he wore a silver ring that caught neon for a second. The SUV turned toward the seaport, then disappeared into rain. While I spoke, the voice stayed still, and that stillness scared me more than anger would have. It felt like talking to a locked door that could open in any direction. When I finished, there was a pause long enough for me to hear the harbor wind whining between buildings and the drip of water off my sleeves. Then the instructions came, not as suggestions, but as something my body obeyed before my mind argued. I understood I was to stay exactly where I was, to stop touching the purse, to stop drawing attention. I was to tell no one. Not the guard, not the passing strangers, not even my mother on speed dial. I was to wait and breathe. The call ended so abruptly I stared at my screen like it had betrayed me. No goodbye, no reassurance, just silence and the reflection of my face, rain-speckled. I tucked the phone into my pocket and immediately regretted it. Like hiding it made me look guilty. Somewhere far off, a siren wailed, then faded, and the city kept doing what it always does, pretending emergencies belong to someone else. I stood under the overhang with Sophie's purse hanging from my wrist and her wallet heavy in my palm. I could feel every security camera like a fingertip on my neck. The instructions had turned me into an object, placed on a mark. I didn't know for whom until now. I tried to imagine walking away, blending back into the crowd, returning to Noah like nothing happened. But my feet stayed planted, as if the pavement had claimed me. The rain thinned for a second, and I heard engines that didn't match traffic. A sedan rolled in from the north, slow and deliberate. Another appeared from the south moments later. They moved like choreography, stopping to block sightlines and seal the corner. Windows tinted so dark they looked painted. No logos, no plates I could read. Pedestrians drifted past, eyes down, pretending they saw nothing. My mouth went dry. I understood the call had been a beacon, and I was the signal, and whatever answered, it was on its way. More cars slid in behind the first two, quiet as sharks. Doors stayed closed, but I felt eyes behind the tint, measuring distances. Me to the bank, me to the alley, me to home. My phone buzzed a low battery warning, and I hated how small problems insisted on existing beside big ones. I tightened my grip on Sophie's wallet and the emergency card, realizing I had broken every rule about staying invisible. Streetlights smeared in puddles like broken halos. I wondered who answers a number like that, and what I had invited into my life. The air changed. The street narrowed. I knew I was about to meet the thing I had summoned. In seconds, someone would step out. The first sedan stopped at the curb like it had reserved the space, and the whole corner changed. Traffic noise faded. Not because the city went quiet, but because my attention narrowed to the wet street and the tinted windows. Another black car slid in behind it, then one from the opposite direction, sealing the block as neatly as a zipper. Rain kept falling. Neon kept blinking. But the normal world felt pushed back, as if someone had drawn a line only certain people could cross. I held Sophie's purse against my hip, my shoulders tight, and thought of Noah's bedtime story still waiting at home. My phone felt useless now, a dead weight in my pocket. Men stepped out without hurry. Dark suits, low umbrellas, earpieces tucked close, shoes that didn't splash even when they should have. Two took positions at the bank doors, turning the glass entrance into a checkpoint. One scanned the alley beside the ATM, eyes flicking to rooftops and cameras like he was reading a map nobody else could see. No one shouted. No one flashed a badge. Yet pedestrians drifted away in instinctive arcs, pretending their sudden detours were about the rain. I tried to make myself smaller, but the purse strap around my wrist made me feel marked. Whoever I had called, these people belonged to him. Then the center of the pack opened, and he appeared as if the weather had been waiting for him. Adrian Cross moved into view with the calm of a man who never arrives by accident. He was tall and broad through the shoulders, hair dark with a thin thread of silver at his temples, coat tailored enough to look untouched by the storm. He didn't rush to me. He simply looked, and that look landed like a hand on my throat. The suited men shifted around him, small adjustments that told me he was the axis. On his right hand, a single signet ring caught the streetlight, gold against rainwater. For a second, I forgot to breathe. I lifted the purse and wallet as an offering, because it felt safer than holding them close. Adrian's gaze flicked over my soaked sweatshirt, my cheap shoes, the worn edge of my backpack, and then settled somewhere deeper, like he was measuring my reasons instead of my face. I slid the items into his outstretched hand. His fingers were steady, clean, and surprisingly careful, the kind of hands you'd expect on a surgeon, not on someone who commands streets. He opened the purse on the spot and laid the contents in order. Keys, lipstick, a phone, the wallet, the black emergency card. Nothing about him looked frantic, yet the air around him tightened. He didn't search the lining like a man hoping. He checked it like a man confirming a fear. With 2 precise movements, he turned the purse inside out and ran his thumb along a seam I hadn't noticed. Something stiff was stitched into the fabric, hidden beneath designer branding. Adrian pinched it free and held it up, a small tracker no bigger than a matchbox, slick with rain. One of the suited men leaned in, eyes narrowing, then pulled back as if the object radiated bad news. That single device changed the story in my head. This wasn't a snatch and run. It was planned, monitored, and meant to keep moving. Adrian's control slipped for the first time, not in his posture, but in his eyes. They went somewhere far away, to a place only fathers know, where love turns into panic with no warning. He stared at the driver's license in the wallet, and I watched the muscles in his jaw lock as if he was holding back a sound. The name Sophie Emerson sat between us like a live wire. I realized, with a sick drop in my stomach, that the woman taken from the curb wasn't just a random victim on the evening news. She was his daughter. The street still looked normal from a distance, but up close it felt like a war room. My voice came out thin inside my head as I replayed the abduction for him, forcing myself to name what mattered. Black SUV, no plates I could see, turning toward the seaport. 2 men in caps, one with a red snake tattoo coiled around his wrist, bright as fresh paint. The driver's eyebrow split by a scar, his ring flashing once as he grabbed the wheel. Adrian absorbed each detail with the same calm he'd used on the purse, but I saw recognition strike like flint. The tattoo wasn't decoration to him. It was a signature. The suited man beside him touched an earpiece and shifted away, moving fast without running. I understood I had just handed Adrian a direction to hunt. Then Adrian's attention turned fully on me, and the temperature seemed to drop. It wasn't hostility exactly. It was calculation, the kind that decides outcomes before anyone speaks. His gaze lingered on my hands, on Sophie's wallet now empty on his palm, on the emergency card that had brought him here. I felt suddenly aware of my own breathing. of the fact that I was standing between men with resources and men who had already shown they could take a person in plain sight. Adrian looked at me the way a storm looks at a rooftop, deciding what it can lift. I sensed the message behind his stillness. What I knew made me valuable, and what I had seen made me dangerous. And now, whether I wanted it or not, I was in a corridor with only 2 doors. In my mind, I saw Noah's face, and I understood the next step would decide whose world claimed us. Adrian's gaze stayed on me after the tattoo detail left my mouth, and the whole block felt like it was holding its breath. Men in suits didn't crowd me, but they shifted, closing angles the way chess pieces do. An umbrella appeared over my head even though I hadn't asked, and that small kindness felt like a handcuff. Rain slid off black fabric, off polished shoes, off the signet ring that flashed when Adrian lifted the purse again. I kept thinking I should step back toward the bank doors, toward lights and cameras, but the perimeter made the sidewalk feel smaller than my kitchen. I understood I was being offered a fork, not a conversation, and my heart hated choosing. Noah's face kept popping up behind my eyes, soft and sleepy, the way he looks when the asthma flares and he pretends he's fine because he knows I'm tired. I pictured his inhaler on the nightstand, the little orange spacer I washed in the sink, the bottle of children's fever medicine I'd been stretching by teaspoons. I checked the time without meaning to, then hated myself because a woman had just been taken and I was counting minutes like a commuter. If I walked away, I could maybe still catch the bus, unlock our apartment, and watch cartoons with Noah until my hands stopped shaking. But would I even make it home? Or would the SUV find me first tonight? That question wasn't drama. It was math. The men who grabbed Sophie did it in front of a bank, in front of commuters, in front of cameras, and nobody reacted. That meant 2 things. Either everyone was too numb to care, or someone powerful had trained the street to look away. I felt the second possibility settle in my ribs like ice. I saw the red snake tattoo again, bright and casual, as if violence was just another accessory. If those men realized I'd noticed, if they traced the purse back to me, they wouldn't need to hunt hard. I was standing under a bank's awning like a pinned note. My name was still on my paycheck deposit inside there. Adrian didn't touch me, yet every movement around me suggested a route had already been chosen. One man drifted closer to the alley mouth. Another angled his body to block the crosswalk view. The bank guard watched from behind glass, suddenly absorbed by his screen. A back door on the nearest car opened with a soft click and stayed open, waiting. The interior light glowed warm, inviting in the way a locked room invites you to step inside and stop running. I felt Adrian's patience, the kind that doesn't run out, and his expectation, the kind that doesn't ask. Protection, in his world, looked like being surrounded before you agreed. It was safety, but it was also custody for now. I tried to shrink my story into something harmless. I was just a waitress who picked up shifts, just a mother who needed her paycheck to clear, just a person who dialed a number because nobody else moved, but the street didn't care what I called myself. The men in suits had already labeled me witness, maybe asset, maybe problem. My anger rose, not at Adrian, but at the crowd that kept walking, and at the part of me that wanted to follow them. I thought about the lesson I repeat to Noah when he drops his toy and looks at me to see what matters. We don't leave people alone when they're scared. I didn't want to be brave. Conscience isn't a halo. It's a weight. It sat on my shoulders alongside the wet fabric of my hoodie and the heavier reality that I'd already been seen. I couldn't erase the fact I'd held Sophie's wallet, read her name, called her father. If I walked away, I'd be alone with that knowledge, and alone with whatever attention it attracted. If I went with Adrian, at least the danger would be in front of me where I could watch it, instead of behind me on the dark stairwell to my apartment. That thought felt ugly, like bargaining with a storm, but it was practical. Mothers learn practicality early. You don't fight thunder. You get your child under shelter and pray. I made a small plan in my head the way I always do when money runs out. I would get a message to Evelyn, even if it was only a few words, so Noah wouldn't be alone if I was late. I would keep my eyes open and my mouth careful, because this wasn't a world where you earned safety by being polite. Adrian watched me as if he could hear each thought click into place. His face didn't soften, but his stillness suggested he respected decisions more than excuses. The open car door waited like a verdict. I stepped toward it, legs numb, heart loud, choosing the storm because running felt like gambling with my son's life at all. The car smelled of leather and rain, a scent that didn't belong to my life of buses and microwaved dinners. A man held the umbrella until I ducked inside. Then the door closed with a hush that erased the street. Tinted glass turned the world into a blur of neon and water. My reflection stared back, pale, like a stranger wearing my face. I pressed my palms to my jeans and forced my breathing to slow. Adrian slid into the seat across from me, and the space tightened around his presence. The engine purred as we eased away from Harbor Federal. I watched the bank lights shrink and knew I had crossed into a life where protection never comes free. A little after 7 p.m., the car slid away from Harbor Federal, and the city became a muted aquarium behind tinted glass. Rain ticked the window like impatient fingers. Leather held a clean scent I did not own, and the heater dried my sleeves while my thoughts stayed soaked. My phone flashed low battery, and my brain did the single mom math. Noah's bedtime, Evelyn's backup key, daycare rules, the danger following me home even if I kept driving forever tonight. Adrian sat across from me, still as a lighthouse, not touching me yet filling every inch of air. His men rode up front, quiet, scanning mirrors, speaking into earpieces I could not hear. I clutched my worn backpack like it could prove who I was. Streetlights smeared gold across wet pavement, and I watched for the black SUV the way I watch Noah's chest when he sleeps, counting rises, fearing the missing one until the car turned into private darkness. We descended into a private garage beneath a tower near the waterfront, the kind of entrance that skips sidewalks and witnesses. A gate opened without anyone leaning out a window. Tires whispered over polished concrete. Security cameras tracked us like unblinking birds. The driver stopped in a cordon bay, and doors opened before I moved, as if my hesitation was predicted. I stepped out, cold air rushing in, and the city above felt suddenly far away for the first time. Inside, everything was soft and soundless. Keycards chirped, elevators waited, and men in suits guided space around me without ever asking permission. I noticed the details like a survival habit. The second camera above the door, the mirrored panel that hid another lens, the way a guard's stance blocked the stairwell. My phone had no signal bars down here. I kept seeing Noah's pajamas and wondering if he would wake and call my name while I vanished into Adrian's elevator. The doors opened to a penthouse that looked like a magazine spread pretending to be a home. Floor-to-ceiling glass wrapped the living room, framing the harbor like a painting that moved. Minimal furniture, pale wood, a long sofa, a table set with nothing. The air smelled faintly of citrus and expensive polish. Boston glittered outside, ferries and bridges and traffic, all of it close enough to touch, yet unreachable as the moon. I felt my lungs loosen, then tighten again. Safety was the word hovering over everything, but it didn't feel like mine. 2 guards stood outside the main door, visible through a narrow gap, their silhouettes steady as furniture. Another man checked a tablet, not in a frantic way, but like he was monitoring weather. I saw sensors on the window frames and a small camera angled toward the hallway. The luxury was quiet, and quiet is what cages use to make you stop struggling before you even notice. My backpack sat on the rug like a dirty footprint. Adrian's people took my phone, not snatching, just holding it with calm expectation, and a charger appeared beside me as if they'd packed it for my arrival. I felt watched without being threatened, which somehow felt worse. Doors clicked softly behind me. I realized I hadn't been asked whether I wanted water, or food, or to leave. Those choices had been decided when I pressed call in the rain outside. Within minutes, I understood they knew me. A man murmured my full name in a way that proved it came from a file, not my mouth. He referenced my apartment building in Dorchester, the make of my car I didn't even own anymore, the coffee shop where I picked up shifts. Then Noah's name surfaced, and my stomach flipped. They knew his age. They knew his school. They knew Evelyn was listed as my emergency contact, and they said it like a fact of weather. I wanted to argue that I was nobody, that my life was coupons and laundry. But the knowledge sat in the room like a weapon laid on a table. If they could find Noah's name this fast, so could Sophie's kidnappers. That thought snapped me upright. I pictured my son's bedroom window, the lock, the light that flickers. Protection suddenly sounded less like a favor, and more like the only barrier between my child and a world that doesn't miss. I finally understood why Adrian hadn't grilled me on the sidewalk. Streets have ears, and questions are breadcrumbs. Here, behind glass and guards, I could be examined without anyone else learning what I knew. Asset or liability, that was the cold logic under the lighting. Outside, I was a loose end. Inside, I was manageable. That idea made me angry, but it made me breathe easier, because manageable meant someone was invested in keeping me until Sophie was found. I walked to the window and looked down at the waterfront. Boats rocked gently, lights blinking. Everything ordinary from this height. Somewhere in that grid of streets, a black SUV had swallowed a woman, and the city kept shining anyway. The glass was clean, but it separated me from the cold air and the wet sidewalk where my life used to fit. I pressed my palm to it and felt nothing back, only my own warmth. Pretty but a barrier. Behind me, Adrian stood near a sideboard, finally alone enough to let something human show. He didn't pace or curse. He opened a drawer and took out a framed photo of Sophie, fingertips resting on the glass as if he could hold her in place. His shoulders sagged, exhausted in a way power can't disguise. Then he returned the photo and stared at the lights. I still wondered what rule kept grief locked, and what would happen if it broke. The city outside Adrian Cross's glass walls looked like it belonged to someone else. Boston Harbor glittered under rain clouds, ferries cutting slow lines through black water, and the financial district blinked like nothing bad ever happened there. I stood with my forehead almost touching the window. Phone finally charged enough to show missed alerts, and my chest felt too tight for the quiet. Every minute I stayed here was a minute Noah might wake and realize I wasn't home. Every minute was another chance for panic to spill into Evelyn's lap, another chance for my normal life to fracture in ways I couldn't tape back together. I kept telling myself I was safe. Guards outside the door. Cameras. Locks. A building that could probably survive a hurricane. But safety isn't just walls, is it? Safety is being able to walk out, to choose where you stand, to call your kid and hear his voice without wondering who else is listening. Here. The air felt controlled, curated, like the penthouse itself was holding me in a gentle fist. Behind me, Adrian moved in a rhythm that didn't match the luxury. He wasn't lounging. He wasn't performing. He looked like a man running on fumes, still refusing to sit down. He crossed the room once, then again, not pacing in circles, more like checking invisible checkpoints. At one point, he opened a narrow drawer in the sideboard, took something out, and held it low in his hand as if it weighed more than metal. It was a wedding band, plain, worn smooth. He didn't slip it on, he didn't kiss it or do anything dramatic. He simply pressed his thumb against it, the way you press a bruise to confirm it's still there. Then he placed it back in the drawer and closed it with the same care he used on Sophie's purse earlier. That tiny ritual hit me harder than any threat. It told me grief lived here too, not displayed, not softened, just contained the way everything else was contained. I watched him pick up the framed photo again, the one I'd seen before. Sophie's smile in daylight, hair pulled back, eyes bright with the kind of confidence you earn when someone has always caught you. Adrian's gaze stayed on her longer this time, and I saw the mask crack in places no one else would notice. A slight tremor in his jaw. A deep inhale held too long. He was the kind of man who could command a street, but the sight of his daughter's face made him look human, not harmless, just human. I found myself wondering, quietly, how a person becomes Adrian Cross. Nobody is born with men in suits appearing on command. Nobody starts out wanting their home to feel like a vault. Somewhere, there had been a fork in his road too, a moment that split his life into before and after, the same way mine had split outside Harbor Federal. He didn't tell me a story like a confession. He revealed it the way he did everything else, in spare facts, in fragments that felt chosen. I understood he'd once been headed somewhere clean. Pre-law, the kind of future with internships and exams and a tie he bought on purpose. He'd believed in rules that lived on paper, rules you could point to and say, this is why. Then the world taught him that paper doesn't protect people who can't afford it. One night, a wrong man in a wrong mood, a woman being cornered, Adrian stepping in because he couldn't watch it happen. The consequence wasn't a thank you. It was recruitment. The way I pieced it together, he'd been offered a different kind of justice and a different kind of power. Not the kind that asks permission, but the kind that takes responsibility whether you want it or not. And once you touch that power, it stains. You can pretend you're still clean, but you start measuring life in leverage and risk. You start believing control is the only mercy you can provide. Then he let one name slip, almost accidentally, and I felt the air shift. His wife, Hannah. The way he held that name inside himself made me understand she wasn't just a chapter. She was the reason the whole book was written in hard ink. Hannah had died young, the kind of illness that starts as a small worry and then becomes the entire room. He didn't describe it in detail, but I could see it in the way his hand stayed close to the drawer with the ring, like grief still lived there, waiting to be touched. Sophie had been left behind, and Adrian, in the wreckage of that loss, had decided Sophie would never be left unprotected again. That was his rule. Power, control, never showing weakness. Not because he enjoyed being cold, but because he believed softness invited predators. Because if he showed the world where it hurt, the world would aim right there. Tonight proved he wasn't wrong. Someone had taken Sophie from a sidewalk like she was luggage. I should have hated him for the way he ran everything. For the way my name and Noah's name became lines on a screen. For the way my choices narrowed the moment I called. But standing there, looking at Sophie's picture, I felt something else slip into me. Recognition. Not of his world, but of his fear. I live by rules too. Mine are smaller, quieter, but they're rules all the same. Pay rent before you buy new shoes. Keep Noah's inhaler within reach. Don't let the lights get shut off. Smile at work even when your back aches. Never show how scared you are. Because if you fall apart, your kid falls with you. I've carried fear like a second purse for years, heavy and always on my shoulder. Motherhood doesn't make you brave. It makes you alert. It makes you willing to do things you never imagined, because the alternative is your child suffering. That's when it hit me. The same thing that makes me feel weak in front of the world is also the thing that makes Adrian dangerous in the most human way. We both have an exposed nerve. A child. We both know what it is to lie awake and bargain with the universe for one more safe day. The difference is that my bargaining looks like coupons and overtime, and his looks like men in suits and locked doors. For a few seconds, the penthouse didn't feel like a cage. It felt like two parents standing at the edge of the same cliff, staring down. Then the warmth evaporated. An earpiece crackled softly from the hallway. One of the guards stepped in with a tablet held out like a verdict. I didn't hear the words, but I saw what they did to Adrian. His shoulders squared. His eyes sharpened. The father slipped behind the strategist again, not because he wanted to, but because the night demanded it. I caught fragments in the glow of the screen. A demand, a number, a location name that meant docks and dark water. The kind of message that turns grief into planning. Adrian's gaze flicked to me, and I understood the next phase was already forming. The same logic that brought me here was about to use what I'd seen, what I'd noticed, what I could offer. My stomach tightened as if the rain had followed me inside. I had come for safety, but safety in his world had a cost, and I could feel, in the quiet between heartbeats, that he was about to ask me to spend it. The softness from a minute ago evaporated the moment the tablet came out. Adrian's face went blank in a way that felt practiced, like a door shutting behind his eyes. Men in suits drifted in from side rooms, bringing laptops, maps, and a small projector that painted the harbor on the wall. My stomach tightened. The penthouse stopped being a living space and became a command post, and I was standing in it in damp sneakers. No one noticed me. On the screen, a message summary appeared with numbers that made the room sharpen. The rival crew wanted $5 million, payable fast, and they wanted access to waterfront routes Adrian controlled. The kind of concession that would let them move cargo and men without interference. The exchange point was an abandoned marina south of the city, chosen for long sightlines and quick exits. Hearing it described so calmly made my skin crawl. Like violence had been scheduled like it was rent. They talked about cameras, tides, and boats the way my coworkers talk about espresso machines. I kept picturing Noah's small hands wrapped around his sippy cup, the way he hums when he's half asleep. My brain tried to do two jobs at once. Stay present in this room and keep a mother's invisible timer running. What happens if I disappear tonight? Who picks him up tomorrow? The men around the table sounded certain. I felt sick and strangely, also angry. I had been treated like a file since I arrived, but suddenly I saw my own usefulness. Their plan was built to watch Adrian, to bait his pride and his soldiers. Nobody in that syndicate had planned for a soaked single mom who looked like she belonged on a dock with a clipboard. I stepped closer before I could overthink it, and I told myself this wasn't bravery. It was refusal to be helpless, while Sophie waited for anyone else. In plain language, I laid it out inside my head. If they were staring at him, I could move in their blind spot. Marina staff wear badges, carry lists, ask boring questions, and people sign without thinking. I could pose as a yacht club contractor doing a late verification sweep, slip a tiny tracker onto the rival boat or SUV, then walk away before the real exchange began. Adrian's men could tail them cleanly after first contact with no sirens. The room paused like I'd dropped a glass. Adrian's shoulders went rigid, and his eyes fixed on me with a warning that felt older than tonight. One of his lieutenants shifted his weight, clearly weighing whether I was useful or delusional. I could feel Adrian's dislike of the idea in the way he angled his body between me and the doorway, as if my safety was already his responsibility. It wasn't tenderness. It was control with a pulse under pressure. I surprised myself by not backing down. I thought of Noah's asthma cough and the way danger always finds the weakest door first. If I went home pretending nothing happened, I would still be a witness, just unprotected and easy to erase. Staying passive had never kept my family safe. It only delayed the bill. I felt anger at the crowd outside the bank, anger at men who could trade a girl for territory, anger at my own shaking knees. I would rather choose the risk than be chosen by it. Adrian didn't soften, but his focus tightened, the way it does when a plan turns solid. He waved a few men closer, and the wall screen zoomed from city blocks to one marina map. I understood his rules without hearing them quoted. If anything felt off, I was to abort. No hero moves, no second chances. Someone would shadow me from far enough to stay unseen. My phone would stay live. And my life, he implied, came before any win. One man handed me a laminated badge with a marina logo and a name that wasn't mine. Another gave me a clipboard with a checklist so dull it almost soothed me. They treated my disguise like office work, but my fingers shook. Adrian's team snapped a tiny tracker into a casing no bigger than a gum pack. When they placed it in my palm, it felt heavy anyway, like a promise and a threat at once for Noah, for Sophie. Time kept moving even in this glass cage. I checked the lights and realized it was close to midnight. Somewhere, Noah was sleeping, unaware his mother was being fitted for a stranger's job. I asked myself what I couldn't say out loud. What kind of mother volunteers for this? Was I brave? Or just out of options? If I failed, did Noah lose me too? The tracker warmed in my palm, and I imagined the marina creaking under my shoes. Adrian's men packed tools with quiet speed, like practice. A dark jacket was handed to me, something that wouldn't draw eyes. They showed an exit route and a single emergency phrase for help, and I memorized it like a prayer. Adrian watched the whole process, not possessive, but accountable, as if my survival would sit on his shoulders whether I agreed or not. The warmth from earlier vanished. In its place was readiness, sharp and unsentimental, and tightened my throat. When the elevator opened, silence hit like a breath before a plunge. I tucked the badge away and closed my fingers around the tracker, telling myself I was still Megan Carter, still Noah's mom, but the truth stayed sharp. My brain was walking into a world of guns, and my only shield was looking ordinary. I followed a guard toward the car, imagining rain on the dock and eyes on my clipboard. The night pulled me forward to the marina. Around 11:30 at night, I left Adrian's tower with a plastic badge on my chest and a clipboard pressed to my ribs. The tracker was taped inside the hollow spine of the board, hidden under a page of boring checkboxes. My fingers kept brushing it as if touch could confirm it was real. In the car, I watched the city lights smear across wet glass and kept seeing Noah's face, small and sleeping, as my reason to come back. The marina sat dark and half abandoned, all wet planks and salt air that tasted like pennies. Harbor lights trembled on black water, turning every ripple into a moving warning. Rope lines creaked against pylons, and somewhere an engine idled with a low, patient hum. I stepped out alone, jacket zipped high, and walked as if I belonged there. In my head I rehearsed paperwork language, calm and forgettable. Ordinary moms did inspections too, I told myself, even at midnight. A sleek speedboat waited at the far slip, black hull slick with rain, chrome rails catching stray light. 2 men stood beside it, shoulders broad under hooded coats, hands always near their waistbands. Their faces were calm in the way predators look calm. I sensed Adrian's coverage somewhere behind me, not close enough to expose itself, but close enough to tilt the odds. That thought didn't comfort me. It only raised the stakes of my mistake with each careful step. I lifted the clipboard and walked up as if I had done this 100 times, pointing at slip numbers and acting mildly annoyed by late-night rules. I let my eyes skim the boat's registration sticker, then the cooler on deck, then the men's hands. One had a faint red ink peeking at his wrist, a hint of a snake under wet fabric, and my stomach dipped. I kept my face neutral, pretending my biggest problem was a missing signature. When the nearer guard leaned in to glance at my forms, I made my body clumsy on purpose. My boot slid on algae-slick wood, and I bumped the hull with my hip like an embarrassed contractor who should know better. That tiny collision was my opening. My thumb peeled back the tracker's adhesive and pressed it under a metal lip near the stern, where a shadow hid the shine. Cold steel bit my skin, and then it was done there. I straightened, trying to breathe like a normal employee, but I saw it the second it happened. Recognition, sharp as a match strike, in the other man's eyes. His gaze flicked from my badge to my hands to the place I'd bumped, and his shoulders tensed. Further down the dock, someone called out, not my name, but a warning tone that made heads turn. The nearer guard's hand drifted toward his waistband, slow and deliberate, and my mouth went dry. For half a heartbeat I considered talking my way out, smiling, acting dumb, but the dock had already changed its mind about me. The men's attention tightened like a rope, I felt the tracker under the boat's lip like a secret that could get me killed. My thoughts flashed to Noah's nightlight, and the way he calls me mama when he can't breathe. I shifted my weight toward space, measuring distance to the boathouse, praying Adrian's shadows were still there. One man stepped into my path, casual but final. Another angled his body so the boat and I were trapped in a narrow strip of dock. I noticed the bulge beneath his jacket, the outline of something heavy, and my skin tightened. The wind carried the stink of fuel. I lowered my clipboard as if to leave, forcing my knees to behave, then pivoted and moved, choosing motion before they could choose for me. My heart counted each step, loud. I caught movement at the edge of the dock, a dark figure near a piling, then another. Adrian's security had been there, just out of sight, but now the rival crew seemed to sense them. A head turned, a shoulder lifted. The marina's quiet snapped, not with voices, but with that electric pause before violence. I felt my stomach drop through the boards. Whatever we expected tonight, they expected us more. Then the night broke open like glass under pressure. The first crack split the air, and my body moved before my thoughts could line up. Another sharp snap followed, echoing off pilings and turning the marina into a drum. Wood splintered near my feet, and I ran, clutching the clipboard like it could block anything. Water slapped the posts as I sprinted, shoes skidding, lungs burning. Courage, I realized, wasn't a speech. Courage was the sound of my breath, the thud of my heart, and silence vanishing all around. A strong arm hooked my waist and dragged me behind crates. Adrian covered me, angled like a shield, breathing steady while mine shook. Shots snapped over the water. I heard footsteps, commands I couldn't make out, wood cracking. Adrian's eyes swept the scene once, then hardened, and I understood the message in his stillness. They had been waiting. Someone had warned them. He kept me low and moved us toward a secondary pier where a small boat waited in shadow. The small boat rocked against the pier, and Adrian's hand stayed at my back, steering me down. The engine whispered, "Ready." Behind us, the marina flashed and cracked, water shivering. I wondered if the tracker still clung to the rival hull like a stubborn truth. We shoved off. The bow slapped dark water in angry beats. I looked back at the slip where Sophie was supposed to appear, and felt a cold thought form. What if she was never here? The little boat punched away from the dock, and the marina lights shrank behind rain. Spray stung my cheeks, and my hands locked around the rail like it was Noah's wrist. My lungs burned from running, then from trying not to cry. Adrian drove with one hand steady on the wheel, the other close to the throttle, eyes scanning the black water. The engine's low growl swallowed the distant cracks of gunfire until only wind remained inside my shaking head. I kept waiting for pain to announce itself, the way it does after you trip and pretend you're fine. My knees trembled, and my stomach rolled like the waves under us. I tasted metal, not blood, just fear. In my pocket, the fake badge and clipboard felt ridiculous. Props from a life I didn't own. I tried to picture Noah asleep, his chest rising evenly, and the thought nearly broke me because I might never see that again after tonight. Adrian's phone lit his face in brief flashes, and I watched his expression read information faster than I could. He listened to voices I couldn't hear, then sent clipped replies I only felt in his posture. Somewhere behind us, men were missing, boats were scattered, routes were collapsing. The calm perimeter from earlier was gone. Now it was fragments, scrambling to regroup. Each time the phone buzzed, I held my breath, afraid the next update would be Noah's name again. The message that landed hardest didn't come with screaming or drama. It came as a flat absence. Adrian's remaining team had searched the slip area, the storage sheds, the vehicles staged nearby. No Sophie, no transfer, no hostage waiting in the shadows. The marina exchange was theater, and we were the audience meant to die in the final act. When that truth settled, my throat tightened until swallowing hurt. I had risked everything to track bait, and it was pointless. As we cut through the industrial channel, Adrian's silence told me more than any shouted command. This wasn't about money the way the demand sheet pretended. The $5 million and port access were props, a script written to look believable. The real prize was Adrian himself, dragged into the open where snipers and traps could finish the job. I felt suddenly sick with the thought that my call, my plan, my body on that dock, had been part of the lure. I kept asking myself how he could be sure, because certainty in the dark feels like a lie. But Adrian's mind worked like a ledger. The setup had been too neat, too timed, too confident. Real kidnappers protect their hostage like their only leverage. They don't gamble her on a crowded dock. The rival syndicate had treated Sophie's name like a flare and expected Adrian to sprint toward it. The moment shots started, Adrian wasn't surprised. He looked betrayed already. The idea of betrayal crept in the way cold seeps through wet socks, slow until it's all you feel. Someone had known our timing. My disguise, even the route to that slip, they had been ready before I touched the hull. That meant the enemy wasn't just watching Adrian from afar. They were listening from inside his circle. I watched Adrian's jaw clench as his phone buzzed again, and I realized the safe lists and escape plans might be poisoned. We left the open harbor and threaded into a maze of canals, where warehouses loomed like sleeping animals. Brick walls rose close on both sides, swallowing the city lights. The water turned darker, thicker, carrying the smell of rust and old fuel. Adrian kept the boat fast but quiet, hugging shadows, avoiding main channels. My imagination filled every doorway with a gun, and every bridge with a lookout. I hated how quickly my mind learned to live this way tonight. My hands finally started shaking for real. After the adrenaline drained, I rubbed them against my jeans, but the cold stayed inside. I kept hearing the word collateral without anyone saying it. If the enemy had planned for me too, then Noah was a piece on their board, even if they didn't know his face. That thought made me nauseous. I stared at Adrian's profile in the dim light and wondered who in his world could trade children for advantage. A narrow opening appeared between two crumbling piers, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. Adrian guided the boat into it and cut the engine, and the sudden silence slammed into my ears. Water lapped softly against the hull. Far away, sirens rose and fell, like a city dreaming. My breath sounded too loud. Adrian motioned for stillness, and even in the dark, I could feel his mind racing, sorting suspects, counting who had known the plan by name. He didn't steer us toward any gleaming tower or familiar garage. I sensed those places had become liabilities the second the trap sprung. If the leak was inside, any obvious refuge was just a marked map point. Adrian's eyes kept lifting toward the concrete walls above us, measuring the city like it had layers. He reached into a compartment and pulled out a small flashlight, then checked a rusted service door on the pier as if it belonged to him. I understood, without being told, that we couldn't call anyone, and we couldn't return to the penthouse. Adrian's control wasn't just about pride, it was about survival math. He listened to the phone, then pocketed it like a weapon he might regret using. In the hush, he set his hand on the door and waited for the moment, the way he had waited in the rain outside the bank. I felt the city above us and a second skeleton below. With the engine cut, the boathouse filled with the small noises I'd been ignoring to stay alive. Water dripped from a beam into the canal with a steady plink. My own breathing sounded like it didn't belong to me. I kept my hands on my knees, willing them to stop shaking, and my mind kept snapping back to Noah, to his nightlight and his inhaler, to the thought of him waking up and finding me gone. The idea that I could die tonight as someone else's collateral made my throat burn. Adrian didn't speak. He listened, head tilted, as if silence could tell him whether we were being followed. When his phone vibrated again, he glanced at it and then slid it away, almost disgusted by the sound. I understood his decision before I could name it. If the plan had leaked, then every address tied to his operation was now a spotlight. Penthouse, garage, safe apartments, even the men he trusted to open doors, all of it could be turned against him. I felt the implication like cold water down my spine. Someone inside his world had the keys. Adrian moved first, climbing onto the pier and offering me a steady hand without asking if I wanted one. In that moment, control looked like urgency. We moved through the industrial edge of the city, not on main streets but in the seams between buildings. Rain had thinned to mist, and the air smelled of algae, diesel, and old brick. Adrian chose shadow over streetlight, pausing at corners to let traffic pass and cameras look elsewhere. I followed close, my sneakers squeaking on wet pavement, my backpack thumping against my ribs. Every time a distant car door slammed, my body flinched. I kept thinking of Noah again, of the way I tell him monsters aren't real, and feeling the lie of it. Here, monsters just wore coats and moved quietly. A rusted utility door waited behind a stack of pallets, half hidden by a chain link panel and a faded warning sign. Adrian slipped a key from his pocket that didn't look special, yet it turned the old lock like it had been used 1,000 times. The hinge groaned, and cold air breathed out, sour with damp concrete. I hesitated at the threshold, because the darkness below felt thicker than night. Adrian angled his flashlight down and stepped first. His hand pressed lightly at the small of my back, guiding, steadying. Not romantic, just practical, like he was keeping me from falling apart. I ducked through, and the door closed behind us with a sound that felt final. The stairwell dropped into a service corridor that smelled like wet pennies and forgotten time. Our footsteps echoed, then echoed again, as if the tunnel wanted to repeat everything we did. The beam of the flashlight caught peeling paint, old conduit pipes, and puddles that mirrored our faces in broken pieces. Somewhere above, a train passed, and the vibration rolled through the walls like a distant growl. I fought the urge to panic, telling myself to breathe through my nose, to focus on the next step, the next corner. Claustrophobia is a strange thing. It turns air into a question. Adrian kept moving, shoulders tight, listening between the rumbles, as if the city itself could betray us. I learned quickly that this wasn't an improvisation. Adrian knew where the ceiling dipped, where the floor flooded, which turns led to dead ends. He had grown up with escape routes the way I'd grown up with backup babysitters. I didn't need a lecture to understand the rule. Smart people never rely on one door. Still, the fact that he brought me here made it feel like more than a clever trick. He was shrinking the circle. In a low, controlled way, he let me understand that almost no one knew these tunnels existed for him. Not his whole crew. Not his showy allies. Only 3 people had this map in their heads. Adrian, Sophie, and Graham Holt. The second in command he trusted like a brother. The name Graham Holt hit me like a bell in the dark. My mind lined it up with everything else. The trap at the marina. The too perfect timing. The way the enemy had been waiting for me. Waiting for Adrian. If only 3 people knew this route, then the leak wasn't a crowd. It was a knife. I stared at Adrian's profile as we walked. The hard lines of his face softened by exhaustion, and I saw fear there, buried but real. Not fear for himself, exactly, but fear that every hand he'd shaken might hide a blade. His hand stayed near my back, guiding me around a flooded patch, and the steady pressure kept me from spiraling. I thought of Noah and realized how strange it was to feel safer underground than above ground. The corridor widened, then opened onto a sealed station platform that looked like a memory left to rot. Old mosaic tiles peeked through grime. A bent sign still pointed toward a line that hadn't stopped here in years. Our footsteps rang across the empty space, and the echoes returned sharper than the sound itself, as if the platform wanted to announce us to anyone listening. Adrian swept the flashlight in slow arcs, checking columns and dark doorways, then cut the beam and let darkness swallow us again. In that blackness, I could hear my own pulse and the drip of water far away. I understood the new truth. If only 3 people knew this skeleton under the city, then the traitor was almost already named. And if Adrian stopped running now, it would be to set a trap from the inside out. Silence on that sealed platform felt thicker than the grime on the tiles. When Adrian clicked off the flashlight, my ears hunted for footsteps that weren't ours, for the faint splash of water, for any sign we'd been tracked. My hands still shook from the marina, and my mind kept sprinting to Noah's bed, to Evelyn's phone, to the awful possibility that I'd become a headline before sunrise. In the dark, every breath sounded like evidence, and I hated that. Adrian had said in his spare way that only 3 people knew this route: him, Sophie, and Graham Holt. The statement looped in my head like a siren. If the marina trap was timed to our arrival, if the enemy knew where I'd place a tracker, then the leak wasn't a rumor, it was a person. Graham's name started to feel less like a colleague and more like a knife left on the table, and I wondered who else listened. Adrian signaled once, a small motion near his wrist, and we waited. Minutes later, a soft pattern of taps answered from the tunnel mouth, the kind of knock you'd miss if you weren't trained to hear it. 3 men emerged, drenched, silent, moving like they'd been born in shadows. They didn't look at me with curiosity. They looked at me like I was part of the problem that had followed their boss underground. Their discipline was the comfort I had. One of them carried a duffel that clinked softly, and another held a spare jacket out to me without a word. Adrian's authority still worked, even cornered, because his men trusted the quiet math in his eyes. He made it clear, through gestures and quick checks on a map, that we were leaving the tunnels before they became a tomb. We moved through a service stairwell and out into cold night air behind a shuttered warehouse where wind tasted metallic. They drove us in separate cars, lights off until the last moment, taking roads that curved away from the waterfront and the places I could name. I watched the city thin into industrial lots and empty rail lines, then into a stretch of darkness where the highway hummed like distant bees. An abandoned steel mill rose out of it, rusted beams and broken panes, a giant ribcage against the sky. Even the air felt tired there, as if work ended. Inside, the mill smelled of wet iron and old soot. Footsteps echoed across concrete, and each echo made me think of the platform again, of being heard. Adrian's men spread out with careful efficiency, checking sightlines, locking a side gate with a chain, setting up one table under a hanging light. A few more survivors arrived in staggered pairs, faces tight, eyes scanning for betrayals. Nobody asked questions in full sentences. They traded looks instead. The silence was its oath. I stood near the table, hugging my backpack, feeling like the only civilian in a room built for war. Yet I also knew why Adrian kept me close. I had seen the red snake tattoo on the kidnapper's wrist, and I had noticed how the crowd ignored Sophie like she was invisible. That detail mattered now because it connected the abduction to a specific crew, and because I was still the unknown variable they hadn't planned for, not even once. Adrian's plan, as I understood it, was brutally simple. He would call Graham Holt in, using an emergency regroup as the excuse, and he would do it from this ugly, controlled place where loyal men could watch every door. My presence would sharpen the hook. Adrian could use my witness account and the fact that Sophie wasn't at the marina to corner Graham into choosing a side in real time. If Graham lied, the lie would have nowhere to hide. That was when guilt hit me in waves. What if I was bait again? Just a softer target the enemy could exploit. Noah's face floated in front of everything. His bedtime questions, his tiny cough, the way he trusts me to return. I imagined Evelyn waking to my absence and then to a call that never came. I wanted to run, but I'd also seen what happens when decent people look away. Sophie had paid for the crowd's silence already. While they arranged the perimeter, I noticed one small fracture in the loyalty picture. A lieutenant checked his phone twice, frowning at an expected confirmation that never arrived, then glanced toward Adrian as if deciding whether to admit it. Another man covered an exit twice, like he didn't trust the lock. No one explained, but the air changed. It felt like there might be more than one leak, or at least more than one person listening. My pulse sped up. Adrian sent the summons through channels I didn't understand, but I could tell it was crafted to sound routine, almost boring. He wanted Graham to arrive confident, thinking he was rescuing the boss from chaos, not walking into a spotlight. Loyal men melted into positions behind pillars, up catwalk stairs, near side doors. They tested lights and shadows with quick switches. My safe spot was behind a steel support, but I knew bullets don't care about plans, not tonight, ever. Adrian reviewed my witness details with me in a way that felt like sharpening a blade. I pictured the red rattler tattoo again, the curve of ink near the wrist, the careless confidence of the man who wore it. I remembered a second detail, too. A thick silver ring on the driver's index finger that flashed when he grabbed Sophie's arm. Adrian's face didn't change, but his stillness did. I sensed he recognized the pattern, and it scared me. Somehow, hours felt compressed into minutes. I sat on a cold crate, knees drawn up, trying to keep my thoughts from spiraling to Noah's breakfast routine. Adrian stood near the center of the mill like a quiet anchor, shoulders square, listening for the world to approach. The loyal men barely moved, but their eyes did, sweeping angles and windows. I realized trust had narrowed to a few bodies in a ruined building, and that even those bodies might be wrong tonight. Then I heard an engine slowing, tires on gravel, a door closing with care. Every man in the mill went still, as if the air itself tightened. Adrian lifted his chin a fraction, and I felt the trap settle into place around us. My mouth tasted dry, and my hands found each other in my lap, knuckles white. If Graham Holt was the leak, how long had he been smiling in Adrian's face? If he wasn't, then someone else was. Silence in that steel mill felt thicker than the grime on the tiles. When Adrian clicked off the flashlight, my ears hunted for footsteps that weren't ours, for the faint splash of water, for any sign we'd been tracked. My hands still shook from the marina, and my mind kept sprinting to Noah's bed, to Evelyn's phone, to the awful possibility that I'd become a headline before sunrise. In the dark, every breath sounded like evidence, and I hated that. Graham Holt walked in first, coat dry enough to make me think he had planned the route. He carried himself with the ease of someone entering his own office, not an abandoned factory at midnight. Two men flanked him, hands low and relaxed, but their eyes never stopped measuring corners. Graham's gaze went to Adrian, then to the space around him, mapping who stood where. He did not look surprised. That calm felt rehearsed, as if he expected us broken. He reached into his pocket and produced a phone, holding it out without hurry. The screen showed Sophie alive, her face pale but steady, and beside her a marker that proved the day was real. A folded newspaper, its date visible under a harsh light. My stomach flipped. Adrian's shoulders tightened in a way no suit could hide, the father in him bracing against hope. Graham watched that reaction with cold satisfaction, like he was tightening a leash around Adrian. From the way Graham angled the phone, I understood the offer was poison, wrapped as mercy. Sophie's safety was being priced in power. Papers came out next, already prepared, the kind you sign when you want to pretend crime is business. The demand was clear in its shape. Adrian would surrender leadership, hand over waterfront routes, and give up control of the port operations that fed his empire. In return, Sophie would keep breathing. That bargain made my skin crawl. Graham didn't plead. He presented a future where Adrian was outdated and in the way. I could hear the logic behind his smooth posture. Modernization, efficiency, new leadership that would stop drawing heat. Then he pushed the knife deeper by dragging Sophie into the argument, suggesting she understood the change, that she would choose stability over her father's stubborn code. Adrian's face barely moved, but something in his eyes went volcanic. I realized betrayal could wear a smile for years. Only then did Graham's attention slide to me, and the temperature dropped. His eyes took in my soaked hair, my cheap shoes, my mother posture that never fully relaxes. I saw the calculation. A civilian witness was an inconvenience, a stray thread that could unravel plans. The way he lingered on me told me he didn't expect me to still be alive, and he didn't like it. My heart hammered as I pictured Noah. I was leveraged too right now. Adrian shifted a fraction, putting himself between Graham and me with the same reflex I use when someone crowds Noah. Everyone noticed. Graham's escorts angled wider. Adrian's loyal men stayed invisible, and that stillness felt like a warning. I watched hands, shoes, and sightlines. I noticed who kept palms open and who hid fingers near jackets. I noticed a quick touch to an earpiece and a glance toward an exit that should have been empty. The perimeter was closing, quietly. I didn't see a camera, but I felt the meeting being captured. A phone sat face down on the table, and a tiny red blink lived high in the rafters. Adrian's men held positions like they were waiting for one crucial admission. This wasn't just a showdown, it was proof. Adrian needed Graham to claim Sophie as leverage and to demand control of the organization and the port routes. The trap worked because Graham believed he had room to speak. Graham's eyes kept returning to me, and I could feel him rewriting the night with me removed from it. He treated my existence as a mistake that needed correcting, and his escort's gaze followed, measuring distances, imagining outcomes. I stayed still, but I screamed. If Graham could betray Adrian after 20 years, what would he do to a mom who had seen too much? Adrian seemed to sense my panic. His shoulder angled closer, turning me into a protected corner. The air thickened as Graham's escorts drifted a step closer, and Adrian's stillness sharpened to something merciless. I saw the moment when men decide whether they will die for loyalty or profit, and I hated that I could read it now. My mouth went dry. I thought of Noah, his blanket under his chin, and apologized in my head for being here. Adrian's gaze never left Graham's face, as if he could drag truth out by will alone right then. Adrian's face stayed calm, yet his hands told the truth. One fist flexed, then relaxed, as if he was gripping a railing over a drop. When Graham invoked Sophie's supposed approval, Adrian's restraint wavered for a blink, and the room reacted to that tiny shift. A loyal man on the catwalk adjusted his stance. Another closed a door that had been left ajar, sealing sound inside. I realized rage was bait and fire, and I couldn't tell which burned first. In that stretched second, I understood the trap had done its job. Graham had shown proof of life, named his price, and exposed how far he'd go. Adrian's men, unseen until now, shifted in tiny synchronized movements, blocking the last open paths without raising a voice. Graham's confidence flickered like a candle catching a draft. I felt my pulse in my ears and wondered if Sophie was truly safe or only another weapon. Whatever happened next would decide everything tonight. The mill didn't explode into chaos the way movies pretend it does. It tightened, the air pulled inward, and the men Adrian had hidden became visible without stepping into the light. Doors that had been open were suddenly sealed. An exit I'd been staring at was no longer an exit at all. Graham's calm faltered for the first time, not in panic, but in that small recalculation people do when they realize the room has been redesigned around them. Adrian didn't lunge. He didn't need to. He held still, and that stillness forced Graham to fill the silence with his own certainty, and then with something sharper. I understood, in a cold flash, that this had never been about convincing Graham. It was about letting him hang himself with his own words while every angle captured it. Somewhere above us, that tiny red blink kept pulsing. On the table, the face-down phone kept recording. Graham kept pushing the same demand, kept framing it as necessity, kept tying Sophie's breath to Adrian's surrender. And in doing so, he stopped being suspected. He became undeniable. The moment the truth tipped into proof, Everything that followed moved fast and quiet. Loyal hands guided Graham's men away from their leverage points. Someone disarmed a situation before it could become a tragedy. I didn't see anything graphic. I heard shoes scrape. I heard a breath catch. I heard the clink of metal set down instead of raised. Then there was an eerie pause where nobody spoke, because speaking would have made it real in a different way. My own body finally remembered it was human. Nausea rolled through me so hard I had to brace against a steel beam. I tasted rust and adrenaline. I kept thinking of Noah waking up and calling for me, and I hated myself for being anywhere but there. At the same time, a part of me knew that if Adrian hadn't trapped Graham tonight, Sophie might have vanished into the kind of darkness that never returns a person. Adrian's men moved like they'd been waiting for a green light only they could see. The proof of life Graham had shown became a breadcrumb instead of a threat. The metadata, the background details, the way the light fell, the sound of wind through something off-screen, small things that meant nothing to me, meant location to them. I watched them turn scraps into a map. Adrian absorbed it all with the face of a man swallowing fire. The father in him wanted to run. The strategist in him forced the father to wait 2 more minutes so the rescue wouldn't be another trap. Then we were moving again. Not as fugitives, but as a team with a destination. I didn't go to the extraction point. They didn't let me. And for once, I didn't argue. I stayed in the mill with one of the loyal men who kept checking the dark windows like the night could grow teeth. My phone had no service, but I kept opening it anyway, like staring at Noah's contact could protect him. Time broke into fragments. A head nod, a car door, distant tires on gravel, the hum of a call connecting somewhere far away. When Adrian returned, he wasn't alone. Sophie stepped in behind him, wrapped in a borrowed jacket that hung too large on her shoulders. Her hair was damp, her eyes ringed with exhaustion, and her hands were still trembling like they couldn't decide whether they were safe. She didn't look injured. She looked emptied out. She took one slow breath, then another, and that simple act hit me harder than any scream could have. Alive, real, not a screen, not a bargaining chip. I didn't rush her. I just stood there, crying without sound, because I knew what it meant to keep breathing when someone else tried to make you stop. Sophie's gaze flicked around the mill and landed on Adrian's face, and I saw a whole lifetime pass between them in 1 second. Adrian's composure cracked, not into weakness, but into something raw and human that made my chest ache. That was the moment I truly believed he'd been telling the truth about her being his only family. But victory didn't feel clean. One of the loyal men who had been at the marina never came through the door. The ones who returned didn't say his name out loud, yet the absence sat in every corner. Trust was ruined. 20 years of friendship had turned into evidence and ash. I felt relief and guilt braided together, because I got to think about Noah again, while someone else's child would get a different phone call. Later, when the mill finally quieted, Adrian gathered the recording, the documents, and the pieces of Graham's admission like they were a key. I understood what he was building. Leverage big enough to pull in federal attention. A bargain shaped like immunity. A chance to burn down the old world before it burned us. I could feel the choice forming in him, heavy and irreversible. Not just defeating an enemy, but walking away from the throne that created enemies in the first place. And as I stared at Sophie's tired face and thought of Noah's sleeping one, I realized the war was won, but our old lives were already over. 3 days later, the adrenaline was gone, and the quiet felt heavier than the gunshots ever sounded in my ears. I sat in a plain office, hands wrapped around lukewarm coffee, while folders and evidence bags moved past me silently. Everything I'd seen at Harbor Federal and the steel mill became statements, timelines, and carefully numbered exhibits for strangers today. The recording caught Graham Holt's leverage and his demands, and that single file turned fear into legal weight fast enough. Agents I never learned to trust offered an immunity-style arrangement, but it came with disappearing for Noah and me too. Adrian signed away the empire he'd built, trading control for Sophie's safety and for our chance to breathe again outside. Boston kept moving, but our lives were rerouted through back doors, sealed elevators, and unmarked waiting rooms at night only. When I finally held Noah, he clung like a little anchor, and I promised myself I would not break again. My mom Evelyn arrived with a small suitcase and tired eyes, acting brave so I could fall apart safely there. She didn't ask for details, just watched Noah's breathing, checked my bruised wrists, and nodded like she understood everything enough. The convoy formed before dawn, black SUVs and one ordinary sedan, then rolled out like a quiet funeral procession south. For the first 100 miles, I kept expecting sirens, but the only sound was tires and Noah humming softly behind. One by one, the escort vehicles peeled away at exits, and each turn felt like cutting a thread to home. In the back seat, a manila envelope waited, heavy with passports, birth certificates, and driver's licenses for 3 new people. The names inside were strangers, and saying them in my head felt like erasing Megan Carter with a pencil slowly. Noah practiced his new last name like it was a game, unaware it was also a shield for survival now. Sophie sat up front, quiet, fingers worrying a sleeve, her gaze fixed on roads that never looked back at us. Adrian drove with one hand steady, the other resting near the console, as if ready to protect without hesitation always. He spoke little, but I felt his choice in the way he avoided cities and favored long, empty stretches ahead. Our destination was Western Vermont, a farmhouse held in a clean family trust with no criminal fingerprints left anywhere nearby. When the driveway appeared, air smelled like apples and wood smoke, and my shoulders dropped for the first time today. The house was warm stone and weathered wood, imperfect paint, and a wide porch that creaked honestly under our steps. I expected luxury, but what waited was ordinary comfort, the kind you can't buy with fear or power ever again. Inside, Evelyn opened windows, checked locks, and started a kettle, turning survival into routine with practiced hands for our hearts. Noah explored the porch steps, counting them twice, then ran back to me like he needed confirmation I was real. Sophie stood in sunlight like it was new, letting warmth touch her face without flinching this time at all today. She didn't become my sister or my best friend overnight, but gratitude grew in small, steady gestures between us both. I watched Adrian move through rooms like a man relearning his own weight without guards and radios around him now. At night he sat with a plain mug, eyes on the dark yard, carrying rules he couldn't drop yet either. I understood, through what he let slip, that control had been his religion since his wife died and stayed buried. Her name was Lauren, and even in silence the loss shaped him, sharpening love into vigilance for Sophie alone always. He'd once aimed for law school, then learned the world rewards force faster than paperwork in some streets at night. Listening to him, I felt my own rules rise up, the ones motherhood carved into my bones to protect Noah. I didn't pretend my fear of Adrian vanished, because fear is honest when you've seen his world up close before. But trust showed up in quieter places, like the way he checked Noah's bedroom door before sleeping every single night. He chose to protect instead of dominate, and that choice mattered more to me than any apology could ever be. Sophie began helping Evelyn cook, peeling apples slowly, as if simple chores could stitch her back together piece by piece. When Noah offered her a toy car, she smiled like she'd forgotten her face could do that so easily again. I kept thinking about the woman taken outside the bank, and how one call redirected 3 lives into new soil. The deal with federal hands wasn't freedom. It was accountability mixed with mercy, and we accepted it without celebrating once. Old rivals might still look, and that knowledge lived under every sunrise like a thin layer of frost on skin. Yet the mornings were ours, with cereal bowls, school forms, and Evelyn humming while she folded towels near the stove. Adrian started talking about legitimate work, shipping contracts without shadows, and investing what remained into honest plans for tomorrow only. I heard in him the same hunger I carry, the hunger to stop running and start raising children in peace. Some nights I still woke to rain in my memory, neon on water, and my finger hovering over fate again. Then Noah would murmur in sleep, and the present would pull me back like a gentle rope through dark hours. I learned that darkness doesn't vanish, but people can choose a direction, step by step, anyway, with truth and cost. Our sacrifice was the old name, the old city, and the illusion that safety arrives without effort or hard choices. But our reward wasn't romance or riches. It was breathing room, and children who could laugh again on that porch. If you've ever felt trapped by a moment, I hope you remember that one decision can open light for you. And if you've ever been brave for someone smaller than you, then you already understand my choice that night too. I still miss Boston sometimes, but I don't miss the version of me who pretended to see nothing at all. In this new soil, I'm learning to be soft without being blind, and strong without being hard to love again. Sophie is healing in her own time, Adrian is rebuilding in his, and I'm doing the same for Noah always. Thank you for staying with my story, for holding your breath with me, and for letting hope land in you. Please like, share, and comment where you're watching from, because your support keeps these stories alive for all of us.